Welcome to The Problematic Gaze with me, Dr. Lee Arnott.
And me, Dave Moore.
Each episode we'll take a piece of pop culture from the last 60 years and examine it through the problematic lens. Is it problematic? If it is problematic, what does that say about society and culture then and now?
And before we take a deep dive into our chosen topic, we'll have a look at the events of the year, what was on TV, what was in the pop charts, just to put our chosen topic into context. So how are you, Lee?
I'm very good. I would just like to apologise for the drunken disgrace that was last week. And if any listeners were offended by the belching or the windy pops or anything else, the masturbatory fantasies of catalogues, then I can only apologise.
Yeah, you were very drunk.
I wasn't just me, pet.
You let me down. You let the podcast listeners down. You let yourself down.
Aside from that, I'm very well, thank you. You had a good week. We enjoyed Sister Sledge, didn't we?
Oh, we did. Yes. Last podcast that we did, we were together. We were allowed together in the same room. We've been separated now. The podcast gods have chosen to separate us again. I can't think why. But we did. You came up for the weekend. We had a lovely weekend. And then we went to see Sister Sledge the day after recording the podcast and De La Soul. It was great. We were debauched. We were a bit drunken. It took a couple of days for me to recover. I don't know about you, but it was well worth it.
Yes, it was. And not so much Sister Sledge as one Sister Sledge and a couple of Sledge daughters. But they were very good. Apart from that 10-minute interlude riffing on their new single, which no one cares about. No one cares about.
I can't remember. I've got a confession to make. I can't really remember Sister Sledge.
Right, let's just crash on, should we?
Yeah.
I suppose this is my I've never seen Who's That Girl moment.
Have you never seen Who's That Girl, the Madonna movie?
No, never. I don't think I've ever seen any Madonna film.
God.
We've had this discussion. We had this discussion a couple of weeks ago with one of our earlier episodes, and your face was like a scalped backside, as it is again right now. Our friendship is over.
We should maybe do Madonna's Who's That Girl as one of our chosen topics.
Do you really, really, really want to put yourself through that?
I do. I love it.
What happens if I find it thoroughly objectionable? Our friendship will be over. I think maybe let's think about that further down the line, but let's not throw the Madonna gauntlet down now, because you know how much I like Madonna, but I'm also, let's just not go there, Dave.
Okay. Yeah. So with that in mind, where are we going this week?
Well, we are going to 1984 to watch The Terminator, which I've never seen before. So I was quite excited about this. And what's your relationship with this film? Obviously directed by James Cameron. What's your relationship to The Terminator?
Well, about 1990, when The Terminator 2 came out, I know we're focusing on The Terminator, which is the first Terminator film. That's when I went abroad over summer to stay with my folks who lived in Bahrain at the time. Now, there was no terrestrial TV then as such. All you relied upon was pirate videos that you rented from the pirate video shop. All the summer blockbusters early, and it was Terminator 2. So we got that, and you have it for about 2 weeks, watch it over and over again, then send it back. So my first experience of The Terminator per se was Terminator 2 Judgement Day, which is a phenomenal movie. It's just a masterclass in filmmaking, storytelling. So then obviously I went back to watch The Terminator, which is an equally good film. So I've got a huge relationship with the Terminator films. I love them.
I think I just kind of bracketed them as an Arnold Schwarzenegger film. I just wasn't that interested, but I enjoyed it. I think it was probably half an hour too long, if I'm being honest. And it was like, oh, here's another chase sequence. A lot of it reminded me of an episode 3 of a Doctor Who 4-parter where they just get chased, captured, escape. So there were some problems with its structure, but I enjoyed it. It was very much a product of its time, I thought. And actually, of all the things we've seen so far, this possibly is the most 80s movie I think I've ever seen in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But we talked in an earlier episode how the 80s didn't really kick in until the mid-80s. This film absolutely screams the 1980s in a way that a film made the year before absolutely didn't, and still had a kind of 70s vibe to it. And there were lots of things that I was just absolutely delighted with in this film in terms of their 80s-ness, which we will discuss. And also some themes it discusses are very 80s. I thought, this is it. This is the 80s have now definitely arrived in film.
So The Terminator is a 1984 American science fiction action film. It's directed by James Cameron, who everyone knows went on to do the Titanic and other big films, Avatar. And it's written by Cameron and Galen Hurd. It stars Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator, who is a cybernetic assassin sent back in time from 2029 to 1984 to kill Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton, whose unborn son will one day save mankind from extinction by Skynet, which is a hostile artificial intelligence in a post-apocalyptic future. So that's the essence of it, and that's essentially why we've chosen this film, to kind of discuss the problematic elements of AI, which we feel as though are very apt today, don't we? So we'll go on to discuss that a little bit later, but why don't we start by doing our news, TV, film, and charts?
Well, I mean, I'm pleased to say that unlike last week's episode, which was set in 1987, there were some quite happy events in 1984. I remember the summer being the Olympics in LA. Everyone on our council estate was wearing knockoff Olympics t-shirts and sweatshirts and jogging bottoms. It was almost like suddenly everyone is an athlete, and we all had merchandise that wasn't from any official merchant, definitely made in China, actually probably made in a factory in Newcastle at that point, with 5 rings on, all completely range of colours and stuff. I just remember the summer of the Olympics and we were all going crazy for it.
This was my first Olympics that I remember, exactly the same. My school, in my household, all the fake 1984 Olympics merchandise was had. Do you remember Zola Budd and Mary Decker?
Well, she was unusual, wasn't she? Because she was South African, but they managed to wangle it that she was able to run for Great Britain, and her big rival was an American called Mary Decker. And I can't remember what distance they were running, but they basically tripped each other up and neither got a medal. I just remember Mary Decker's bleating face, crying, and all the Americans going, "Oh my God!" We were going, "Oh, shut up! It wasn't deliberate." But it was such a big, and the headlines showed Mary Decker's sobbing face. It's like, "Oh, get over it!" Typical fucking American. Terrible.
Zola Budd was pilloried for it, wasn't she? So controversial at the time.
She was.
Do you know what Zola Budd's favourite song is?
What?
It's A Long Way to Trippermary.
Oh my God.
I've been hanging on to that joke since 1984.
40 years you've been hanging on to that joke. Wow. And here we are. Well done. Are you proud of yourself? If
that's not going to increase our listenership, I don't know what is. We might as well just pack it all in now.
I might get it on a t-shirt, love, honestly. And surprisingly, still surprising, in February that year, it was the Winter Olympics in Sarajevo, where, of course, Torvill and Dean got their perfect sixes with Bolero. And I actually was obsessed, as you can imagine, with Torvill and Dean. I had roller boots, which couldn't do quite the same tricks and flicks as ice skates. But me and my friend Marie on the estate used to try and do Bolero at the bottom of the street. And I remember buying the single and one day in my bedroom reenacting the whole of Bolero, flinging myself around the bed, obviously being Jane Torvill. And I looked out my bedroom window and the fucking next door neighbour who lived opposite is standing watching me with just this grin on his face. He just thinks, "You fucking lunatic." And I dropped to the floor like I was in a SWAT team. And I remember crawling across the floor and my hand reaching up so I could just shut the blind quickly. And I was like, "Oh my God, oh my God." I couldn't look at him ever again until he moved.
Yeah, that reminds me of when I reenacted Madonna's La Isla Bonita from her Who's That Girl tour on my roller boots in the driveway, thinking no one was watching, and the neighbour leant over the fence and she said, "Oh, that's lovely." Oh, God. Mortified. As little gay boys, we'd like to do it in private, don't we? But if anybody watches
I was reenacting when the princess gets sacrificed to Poseidon in Clash of the Titans at the bottom of the street against the garages. Imagining myself being tied up against these pillars and this big thing come out, going, "Oh my God, oh my God." My mum went, "What the fucking hell are you doing from the gate?" And I was like, "Nothing."
In January, just skipping back a little bit, January the 27th, American singer Michael Jackson's hair caught fire during the making of a Pepsi commercial.
Yes, and he never got over that. Apparently, that was the beginning of his painkillers and addiction to drugs and stuff because he was traumatized by it. Apparently, some people have said that's where the rot set in with Michael Jackson. Have you seen the footage of it?
Yeah, scary.
Mm.
Just to bring it up to date, Sabrina Carpenter, who is a modern singer, who's just had the number one and number two spot simultaneously. She was on stage, and I saw a picture of her when fireworks went off in the background, and it was obviously a little bit too close to comfort. Obviously, they do flame-proof hairspray these days, obviously because of this incident with Michael Jackson. But she shat her pants and ran off. So
Right.
still a bit dodgy.
Big news, the miners' strike starts in this country in March, and that will go on for a long time. And I remember, obviously being from the Northeast, there's a lot of coal mining villages and towns around where my town was, and hearing the talk of the flying pickets going and all this stuff and collections being made for the miners and stuff. It really felt like a bit of a class war thing going on in being stuck in the middle of that. And that will go on and on and on.
It's so interesting because geographically, we grew up fairly close to each other. What would you say, about 75 miles, 100 miles away from each other?
Yeah.
The miners' strike, you were very much embroiled in it. That was very much kind of your world. You witnessed it firsthand. But living in Scarborough, which is still the northeast of England, I didn't experience it at all, apart from when I watched it on TV, and it felt like a world away. Isn't that strange how...
Yeah,
we're so close but so far apart in those terms.
But I think it's one of the weird things about our country and the United Kingdom is that you can go literally 4 miles away from somebody and have a different language, have different slang. Even though we're a small country, we're so disparate in terms of the cultures you can find over the course of 50 miles. If you go from 50 miles from one point to another point, the cultures, the traditions are all so different. The dialects are so different. So it doesn't surprise me. In October, the Brighton bombing takes place, where the Provisional IRA will bomb the Tory party conference. They'll kill 5 people and injure 32. They don't get Maggie Thatcher, obviously, who's their main target. And I'm reading a very good book, if anyone's interested in that part of history, called The Killing of Margaret Thatcher, which is absolutely superb. And it's all about the lead up to it and the reasons why and stuff. But Maggie, of course, got huge political capital from it by being on stage at the conference 6 hours later and saying, nothing can stop me. It's like, if they needed any more proof that this was the lady who was iron, then absolutely here it is, Did you notice in October, Michael Burke makes his legendary appearance, his news report from Ethiopia, reporting on the famine there? And it's that news report which will galvanize the whole Band-Aid operation, Feed the World, Bob Geldof, and it's horrific. I mean, you can watch it on YouTube. And he says something like dawn breaks over a scene of biblical destruction, and 1 million people will die in that famine.
December, the Bhopal disaster. I remember this. Do you? Yeah, so this was a leak from a pesticide plant in Bhopal, which was in India. It kills more than 8,000 people outright and injures over 500,000, with more later dying from their injuries. The death toll reaches 23,000. It's the worst industrial disaster in history. Kind of rather apt for what we're going to be talking about today, I feel. And I'll explain more why later. Shall we have a look at the TV for the month of October 1984 in the UK? So, surprisingly, or rather not surprisingly, number one with 17.5 million viewers is not Coronation Street. No. It's not EastEnders because that hasn't come out yet. It's Minder.
Minder. Did you watch Minder? My dad, we loved it in our house. I never watched it. I couldn't really understand it. Too young for it.
Yeah, I used to love George Cole, and I used to quite fancy Dennis Waterman in it as well.
Yeah, I never fancied Dennis Waterman. I was surprised at how much comedy is in the top 30. Fresh Fields, Duty Free. I used to love Duty Free.
Yeah, two series of it. Much beloved. Neil Stacey and Gwen Taylor, Joanna Van Gysegum. No one could pronounce her surname, could they?
I always thought it was Gysegum and Keith Barron. Benny Hill is huge. And again, used to love watching Benny Hill. I thought it was hilarious. I see that Just Good Friends has started this year. That's a show about a couple who have reconnect after years after he dumped her at the altar. Did you notice that the highest BBC show was number 16, and that was Tenko?
Yeah. Hence the reason for
Yeah.
EastEnders, BBC
Yes.
needing a ratings grabber.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tenko, I've just kind of been watching Tenko a little bit retrospectively because I don't really remember it the first time around. It wasn't something that my family watched, but I mean, I know that you're a huge fan of Tenko, aren't you?
It's so well written. The characters are all so well drawn. I think it still packs a punch today. Probably wouldn't get made today because a lot of it is quite near the knuckle, especially in terms of how the Japanese are referenced. Quite a lot of casual racism thrown around. But, you could argue that it's very much representing the time it was set.
Yeah.
But it was an amazing piece of TV work.
Okay, let's just move on very quickly because we are looking at a film this week for the domestic box office for 1984 for the USA, the top films of 1984.
What a top 10. God, this is just blockbuster after blockbuster after blockbuster, isn't it? Ghostbusters #1, The Temple of Doom, Gremlins, The Karate Kid, Police Academy, Footloose, Beverly Hills Cop, Star Trek 3, Tones of India, and Romancing the Stone. That's just the top 10.
Yeah.
I think I saw all of those at the cinema, all of them. Maybe not Terms of Endearment, but God, and I remember going to cinema and they were packed in those days, and they were shit.
Yeah.
Terrible decor. The one in Warport was really faded and tatty. They still had those really crappy local adverts before the film actually started.
Yeah.
They had some weird lava lamp kind of projection with some shit music before anything started, But my God, the excitement when I was going to the pictures to see something like Ghostbusters and Indiana Jones was just phenomenal.
Just crazy. This is before, like I was 10, you were 11. We're both about 10 or 11 at this time. And it's before you fully understood the filmmaking process. It was when you went as a kid and it was a magical experience. What you were seeing, whether it was a gremlin setting fire to a swimming pool or, a Ghostbusters, Slimer in the library or something, it was all real. It was all happening.
Absolutely. Honestly, Ghostbusters, Indiana Jones, and Temple of Doom, and Gremlins are just 3 films that I could just watch again and again and again when I was a kid. Yeah. And I watched Gremlins again recently, and it's a fucking great film. I mean, number 11, another favourite of mine, is Splash. I absolutely love that film.
Did you want to be Daryl Hannah?
Of course I did. It was Daryl Hannah, and I wanted to be Kim Cattrall in Mannequin as well.
Mannequin, looking back with fresh eyes, isn't such a great film.
No. There's so much wrong with it.
So let's move on to the official singles charts, which is from the 21st of October to the 27th of October, the Terminator being released on the 25th. So this is the charts that was around when Terminator was released.
Number 1, Freedom, Wham. My mother was obsessed with Wham, obsessed with them. She'd gone from Adam and the Ants in 81 to Wham. And I realized my mum was like 26, 27 at the time, so no wonder she was a young woman, No bigger a George Michael fan than me, ma'am, let me tell you.
Oh, really?
I had to break the news to when he died. Oh. And she was devastated, lit a candle for him and everything, couldn't spare herself.
Together in Electric Dreams.
Yeah, I love that song.
21, Purple Rain by Prince of the Revolution.
Number 20, Smooth Operator by Sade.
Yeah. And very, very apt. What's at number 24, Lee?
Lost in Music. We saw one Sister Sledge on Sunday, didn't we? Careless Whisper, number 26, Caribbean Queen. Oh, there's a lot of stuff in here, David. Isn't it funny to see a film set only 5 years in the future?
Yeah.
And in 1984, that seemed so far in the future. Yeah, we have this pretty apocalyptic scene, don't we? Robots running amok, these things killing humans, those blue laser beams you get, which I love in 80s films. They're not CGI, they're hand painted in by some artist, really carefully. And they look really real. It's like Ghostbusters has the same kind of zappy energy. I love that. cut to present day LA, and suddenly a naked Arnold Schwarzenegger zaps into existence with a very nice bottom, I have to say. He then establishes his credentials by meeting a bunch of very typical 80s punks and just basically kicks the shit out of them and then nicks their clothes. And then we get another guy zaps into existence with another equally nice bottom.
Yes.
And he's looking for someone called Sarah Connor. I think, who's
Yeah.
Sarah Connor, you know?
Yeah, Michael Biehn, who plays the second guy, who plays Kyle Reese, who's later emerges is a resistance fighter, comes to save Sarah Connor, is very hot. He's in quite several Cameron films.
Right. I mean, it's interesting that he was also in Aliens as well, I think.
Yes,
He played one of the troopers in Aliens. When we introduce Sarah Connor, we get this tinkly, tinkly piano music. Did you notice that signifies she's a lady?
Yeah.
You know, it's just kind of
virginal.
Yeah. What's your take on Arnie? Just his body, his physicality. When you look at it, what do you think about him? Not in terms of attractiveness, but that whole kind of macho, hyper masculine, which becomes such a feature of the mid 80s and going forward from this point on in cinema and popular culture, actually.
When I look at that form of body, it strikes me as being a little bit asexual. It's because it's just accentuated so much to. I don't look at it and think, "Whoa, that's a really nice body." I think for me, it's kind of like overly muscled. It's an unachievable state. And therefore I don't find it that attractive. What about you?
It's interesting. I'm the same as you. It becomes devoid of like attractiveness, but it's interesting. You get this hyper masculinity, especially in American culture, which is possibly another reaction against feminism in the 70s, against gay liberation in the 70s. What tends to happen is you get masculinity reasserts itself in various forms. And another thing this film chimes with for me is that, jumping ahead a bit, this film is all about the robots in the future who are killing the humans after a nuclear war, and
that was started by the robots.
Yes, yeah, and the rise of the robots is a real thing at the time. Japanese manufacturing has started to really use robots towards the late 70s, and by the mid 80s in America especially, they're using more robots in manufacturing, which of course is getting rid of those jobs which working class men used to do. So whenever these jobs are being taken from working class men, culture somehow compensates from this lack of masculinity by presenting these aspirational figures such as Schwarzenegger, Stallone, Van Damme. And I thought it's another thing about this, why this movie is so 80s, in that it's representing those working class male fears in this form of this masculinity, which is not even aspirational. It's just so stylized as to be almost nonsense,
unobtainable.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. I never thought of that before. Well, you did seem to have an influx of those kind of hyper-masculine characters, like you say, the Van Dammes, the Stallones, the Schwarzeneggers. I'd never looked at it in that light before.
Yeah, it's basically a compensation for a lack of or a loss of masculinity. Also, as well as the robots taking these jobs, women are taking more male jobs, more women are coming into the market than ever before. In Britain and the USA, the rise of the woman, I think of films like Working Girl, is reflecting that the workplace itself is becoming more feminine, and that actually those formerly masculine spaces of those factory shop floors where you were able to put pictures of naked women and stuff are disappearing, So as a compensation, we get figures like Stallone and Schwarzenegger. Again, it was just another reason why this film is so 80s. The fact that it all stems from a nuclear war is another one of these 80s things. We've talked before about how scary it was in 1984, the threat of a nuclear war. Threads, the BBC scary film, which we must cover at some point, is released in 84 as well. So nuclear war, also very 80s,
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was interesting that a lot of the film was set in factories, so there was a lot of machinery there.
Yeah,
It's kind of almost presenting itself like, okay, this is the start. This is kind of normal. We're operating the machines at the moment, but
yes,
it was very much wanting the viewer that these all seem kind of like innocent robots and machines now because we're operating
yeah,
them. But look what
yeah,
happens in the
yeah.
future.
Yeah. And also, the news was full of images at the time of these incredible robots in factories assembling cars, assembling manufacturing equipment and stuff. So this film's really riffing on that.
Yeah,
It's really playing into, what technology was going to do and what it could potentially, how destructive it could potentially be. I mean, I love when Arnie does get his outfit from his punk. He just looks so camp,
yeah,
ironically, in his top, just the top he chooses.
yeah,
Which incidentally did not fit one of the punks he took that from. That top, I
yeah,
don't know, it's like you've got incredible Hulk clothing going on here. I was astonished. You then get a scene of Arnie going into a gun shop and just basically having this conversation with this gun guy. And again, being in Britain, we just cannot comprehend that he could just walk into a shop and buy guns like that. It's
yeah.
astonishing, isn't it?
I know it was really interesting. Actually, it's quite prescient as well because there was a conversation that JD Vance, the potential vice president to
Yeah,
Donald Trump,
yeah,
was having about yet another school shooting in America, and he
yeah.
basically said the problem isn't the guns; it's the fact that there's not enough security in high schools,
I know, I know.
which is just so
It's just, and he
alien
said
to us, isn't it?
He said it's just a way of life, a fact of life,
Yeah,
isn't it? The school shooting happened. No, it doesn't.
yeah,
It isn't. It isn't anywhere else in the world. And then, well, as we find out, Arnie is then going to find and kill Sarah Connor, but all he's got is a phone book to go through
mhm,
again. So 80s.
yeah,
Go look her up in the phone book. And you see him pull up in his car and you see him run over a kid's toy. And you know when he runs over that kid's toy that he's an absolute bastard.
yeah,
What a bastard this man is,
yeah,
I was also quite shocked, not shocked, but he just basically guns down this woman, another Sarah Connor. And this film is a brutal film. It's
yeah.
very
It's
violent
very
film.
violent, very violent.
Yeah.
And it's all
And
kind of
again,
aimed towards women as well.
yeah, until we get to the police station. But you're right,
Yeah,
it's the violence is, and it's brutal violence and it's shocking violence. And again, it's the 80s. You get this rise of violence like this in movies. Now, there's been a few kind of conjectures about why this should happen. Certainly, I think restrictions are lowered. The rise of the video market means that filmmakers have to be more and more attention grabbing. So the more blood and guts you have, the more you're appealing to a certain demographic, the young male,
yeah,
and the young male who's also liking what he sees in Schwarzenegger likes to see violence of this nature.
yeah.
Again, it's just another example of how this movie is so fucking 80s.
Can I just talk about? Okay, so he chases all these Sarah Connors, and he actually goes to the
Yeah,
real Sarah Connor's house, but
yeah,
thankfully Sarah Connor isn't there, but her flatmate's there with her boyfriend. Can I just
yeah.
reduce it to a basic level of how fit the boyfriend was?
Yes, he was. He was. But he was also a bit creepy as well. He kisses Sarah Connor on her way out on the cheek,
Yeah, yeah,
gives her a bit of manhandling. Another 80s moment when you see Sarah and Ginger, her flatmate, getting ready, and they are so again, I
yeah,
can't stress enough how 80s this movie is. They look so 80s.
yeah.
Ginger's got the perm, they've got the outfits on, they're just wow, we are proper 1984 right here.
Yeah, Sarah Connor's hairstyle was almost verging on a mullet like.
Yeah, it is absolute. There's a definite touch of the mullet in there.
Yeah,
Um, Another little 80s moment. Everyone's wearing Walkman in the 80s. I don't know
yeah,
how many films of the 80s you see of people wearing Walkmans, and where Walkmans are used to increase dramatic tension because
yeah,
somebody can't hear something because they're wearing a
yeah.
Walkman. Ginger wears the Walkman when her boyfriend's having sex with her.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like, are you in the moment, Ginger? Are you
Yeah.
with me, love?
Yeah. I I really loved talking about the music. Well, the music in general is brilliant. Very 80s synth music, isn't it? Very
Mhm,
ominous. It
mhm.
reminded me a little bit of Halloween, a
Yes.
kind of like a
Yeah.
more modern version of the Halloween music. And I really
Yeah, yeah,
enjoyed
yeah,
the scene in the nightclub because that was a very, Sarah Connor runs away, tries to hide in a nightclub because she realizes that
yeah,
someone's following her. When she
yeah,
thinks it's the Michael Biehn character who is following her, but really he's there to save her. So she kind of waits in the
yeah.
nightclub, calls the police and says, "I'm Sarah Connor. I know other people called Sarah Connor who have been murdered tonight. There's a strange man following me. Come and get me." And the nightclub is very, very 80s, isn't it?
Oh my God, Tech Noir. It's the name of the nightclub. And again, I've just written this is the most 80s film I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Dreadful. The music in the nightclub was shit. It's that kind of
Oh,
awful American faux heavy metal you get in nightclub scenes and films. But the crowd in there are just astonishing. The vibe in there is astonishing. I could just smell the dry fucking ice from my
yeah.
from my sitting.
And the stale
Um,
beer on the floor as well.
Oh, absolutely. Your feet would stick to that floor. You know they
Yeah.
would.
Yeah.
I also, another thing I loved, another 80s, cops all smoking, all having the
Yeah.
tab, all the cigarettes, all the policemen just having tabs all the time. Loved that. So, yeah. So, Arnold, both of the guys from the future follow Sarah to the nightclub. There's another shootout scene,
Yeah.
another incredibly violent scene of Arnie just like blasting people away. I mean, there's something of a video game about it, and of course, video games are rising at this time as well and becoming increasingly violent. So then we have a car chase. Now, one thing I said at the start of this, I think this film was half an hour too long,
Uh,
and just because we have a car chase here, a car chase there. Now we're on our feet having a chase. Then we have another car chase. Then somebody's in a lorry. Then we have another chase. It just could have done with a little trimming of its time. I understand,
of
but I
its
just
time.
get a
And
little.
some people really enjoy that action aspect of it, don't they?
Yes,
Of over
absolutely.
story or,
Yeah,
to accentuate the story. I really enjoyed those action sequences because I always kind of try and work out how they filmed them. And
right.
invariably, the vehicles are always going a lot slower than they manage to make it out on the screen, whether it's kind of like, increasing the frame rate, to speed it up a little, or just using the magic of
Right.
movies to kind of make it look like it's a high speed car chase, because every
Yes.
single setup is going to be, time consuming, etc. when you're under, really big budget restraints. And to make it look as physical and as fast as they do, I'm always in awe of these car chases.
Yeah. I mean, really well filmed. I could have just done without it. It doesn't further the plot
Yeah.
along in any way at all. Although we do find out in this particular one what the deal is with Reese, that he's from
Yeah.
the future. There's been a nuclear war, that the robots went insane, basically, and started a nuclear war. He wants to get rid of humanity. Um, there's a hint that there's a hint of the kind of Nazi concentration camps, isn't there? And he talks
Yeah.
about how they branded people and put them in extermination centers, which I thought was quite interesting. But it transpires that Sarah's important because her son is going to be the leader of the revolution in the future. And of course, Sarah hasn't had her son yet. So I wondered who the father was going to be of Sarah's son. Let's just see, shall we, if my suspicions prove correct on this one? This is probably a good time to talk about the bootstrap paradox, which is basically what this film is. And the bootstrap paradox is a theoretical paradox of time travel that occurs when an object or piece of information sent back in time becomes trapped within an infinite cause effect loop and so causes itself, basically. So Reese has to go back, have sex with Sarah Connor so she can have the child that will then go on to teach Reese, blah, blah. So it's kind of, it felt in 1984 this was a new thing, but actually the concept has been around for quite a long time. But it does feel fresh for 1984 for sure.
Well, that's really interesting. So, yeah. So, you're not to know because you haven't seen Terminator 2 Judgment Day yet, but the son becomes hugely, even more important to the story as he does now. John Connor is
Right.
kind of like a folklore hero within the Terminator canon.
There's quite a graphic scene actually where he cuts his arm open and pulls his arm out. And again, from the late 70s through to the 80s, we start to get much more graphic gore and violence in movies. Partly because you start to get working in the industry, a lot of guys have been in the Vietnam War. So have seen actually the effects of warfare on bodies and there's one guy called Tom Savini who does like the George A. Romero zombie films, who kind of becomes the master of it. So they've seen how flesh rips apart, what happens when things. So you start to get a lot more realistic, gruesome goriness in movies that you never have before. And I thought the gore in this and the practical effects, like he does one point, he does an operation on his eye,
Yeah.
which was, again, all practical effects. I thought really well done, actually, because I think those practical guys from this time are so much more effective than CGI and.
So, yeah, the effects were made by Stan Winston, who's kind of famous special effects guy. He kind of started off on the Terminator. Well, he kind of made his name on the Terminator films and went on to do Aliens, The Thing, Jurassic Park, Edward Scissorhands, etc.
Wow.
And he's actually won 4 Academy Awards for his work. So, yeah, I mean, quite dated now to look at, but pioneering at the time, weren't they, a lot of these effects?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember that's the first time I saw Friday the 13th, and you see someone getting their throat cut, and it's a really common effect. Now, you've seen it in Game of Thrones, you see it in everything, that it genuinely looks like someone's getting their throat slit, and the first time I saw it was mind-blowing. And tying in with this kind of ultra-violence you're getting in movies is actually the realistic effects on the human body of what happens with this ultra-violence, and I thought the sight of Arnie with his arm cut open. To be fair, I was having my tea at that point. I had to switch it off for a couple of minutes while I was having my tea. I knew it wasn't real, but it was a bit. I did feel a little bit like I was going to throw up with it. So very good. Bravo to the special effects. Again, citing it right in this time, when they're becoming a real thing. So the cops have got involved. They're both now in the police station. Sarah's told to wear a body armor suit and have a kip. She'll be okay there. Of course, she won't be.
Yeah.
And while Reese he's being questioned as being absolutely insane with his story from the future. And then, of course, Arnie comes in, shoots all the police, destroys the police station, blah, 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 blah. They run again.
Arnie comes into the police station, doesn't get the satisfactory result he wants. So what does he say?
Yes. He says,
I'll be back.
Yeah.
Which apparently at the time he had real trouble saying. So he wanted to say, I will be back. And James Cameron insisted that it should be, I'll be back. And then it became a massive...
Because Arnie wasn't that bothered about this movie, was he? He didn't want to do it, I read. He wasn't... He didn't think it was much of it. And and I remember reading about James Cameron thinking his accent, but actually his accent really worked for it, but he didn't think much of it. He thought it was going to be a load of old shit, and he was just doing some crummy movie for a couple of weeks. And doesn't he only have 32 lines or something?
He does, yeah. He has very, very limited lines, although he has more screen presence than he does lines. But apparently he sat in a screening of it, and within the first 10 minutes or so, he kind of realised, oh my God, I think we're on something here. After having all the way through shooting, etc., just thought, oh, this is a pretty crummy movie. We
get another flash forward to Reese in the future when we see how shitty humanity is eating rats and things and struggling. And then Reese has a photo of Sarah, which is how he knew about her. Again, Sarah looks like she's from 1984.
She looks like she's in a Jane Fonda workout video.
Yeah, she does. She should be wearing a leotard underneath when she can't see outside, doesn't she? Feeling the burn. I think they run away again.
Yeah.
And end up in a hotel. And of course, we know what's coming. Invariably, they've got to have sex with each other, Reese and Sarah, because it's a man and a woman in an 80s movie. But actually, as we find out, they have to, because Sarah's going to give birth to John, who's going to be the future leader, yada, yada, yada. But again, the most 80s sex scene.
Yeah.
I thought, Sarah on top looking ecstatic while close up of their hands clenching each other on a bed sheet, just some quite rigid moving up and down.
Yes. No, it was interesting, actually. There was a lot of other people who were considered for the role of Kyle Reese. Christopher Reeve, Matt Dillon, Kurt Russell, Tommy Lee Jones, and even Bruce Springsteen at one point. But actually, they chose Michael Biehn because they realised that what they had to do in this movie was make these two people fall in love really, really, really quickly. And obviously they kind of help it out storyline-wise that he's always been in love with the romantic notion of this mystical John Connor's mother, and hence why he volunteered to get sent back. But also, on screen, they've got to have real chemistry. And they said that a lot of the other people they auditioned for this role were just a little bit too rugged and action hero-like. And,
right.
there was no kind of spark between them. But when they saw Michael Biehn with Linda Hamilton, they thought, actually, this can work. We can believe these two people could actually have a loving sexual relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I bought it. I bought that. I mean, to be fair, it just transpired that he's a virgin. He clearly takes to it like a duck to water, but obviously he's been in love with her for so long. But I bought their chemistry, I totally did. And I can see why, because there is a sensitivity to his performance underneath the kind of stuff he has to do. So then there follows a scene that follows the final denouement where Arnie is killed again and again and again and comes back again and again and again, and they end up in a factory. At the end of, he's driven a lorry, he's driven over by a lorry, he's set on fire, he's got no fucking legs, he's got no body, he's just a metal robot skeleton thing chasing them. And oh my God, it's just, I did write at one point, I went, he's still alive, come on,
But that's part of the fun. It's like this cyborg will never give up. Never.
Stop.
That's part of the fear of the whole movie, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I love the whole Chekhov's press, Chekhov's done, here's a press, an industrial press we're going to introduce here. And we're definitely going to use it later on towards the end. But eventually they kill him. I mean,
Again,
it's great.
Yeah, they do manage to kill him. Sadly, Michael Biehn does die along the way. But I thought it was quite inventive that they managed to kill the machine with a machine that was operated by human. Sarah Connor presses the button and kills the machine. And all the way through the final sequence, there are robotic arms in motion, etc. It's on a conveyor belt in a factory. And it's kind of here saying, at the moment, we're still in charge, so we can still defeat them. But at what point will this change? Which is kind of why I wanted to... I suggested we watch this movie, because I think it's just so relevant to today, when AI is developing at such a pace that even the academics and the people involved in making AI are starting to issue warnings about how efficient and intelligent these machines are becoming. I spoke earlier about the factory in India and the chemical leak. What if a factory like that was completely run by computers? And it was part of a massive mainframe of computers that was running, all the nuclear power stations, etc., all the chemical plants. What's not to say that intelligence could become so intelligent that if it wanted to destroy the human race, it could release those chemicals into the atmosphere, and that would be a way of killing humans.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the way intelligence is becoming so intelligent?
I think it'd be nice to see. It does freak me out, to be honest. It does freak me out. But actually, if we get AI that looks around the world and says, do you know what the biggest fucking problem on this planet is? Humans.
Yeah.
It's the animals and nature ain't the problem, it's humans, and it kills us all, and the rest of the planet flourishes away quite happily. I'm all right with that. If they go insane and destroy everything, I'm not so all right with that. But if they want to preserve everything else, then let them get on with it.
Well, there is a theory. There was I was reading an article on AI, and it says that it was talking about this rhinoceros that's become extinct, and the rhinoceros doesn't know why it's become extinct, and the reason why is because herbalists have thought that their penis grounded down could increase libido.
Their horn.
Oh, their horn.
Grounded down. Yeah.
It's their horn, not their willies. Got willies on the brain. We are problematic gays after all.
Okay.
But do you know what I mean? So humans might not necessarily know why these supercomputers want to wipe us out until they're wiped out.
Yeah.
And also, if you've got two sides at war with each other, if one of those sides are using human intelligence to develop their strategies of how they're going to win this war, and the other side are using artificial intelligence, then the artificial intelligence is going to win over the human intelligence in the nuclear war.
Of course it is.
So that's scary. So it's not just about be nice to Alexa, although you should always be nice to Alexa, because when the day of reckoning comes, she might save you. But it's about how we're letting all this happen, so much so that Joe Biden's issuing studies and laws, etc., into kind of, trying to rein in this artificial intelligence, but soon it's just going to become a wild west, isn't it? I'm not getting all conspiracy theory and tinfoil helmet or anything, but I think it's very real.
I don't think you need to get conspiracy theories, because you can look on YouTube and see what people are developing now, and it's just astonishing what AI and robots can do, and the precision they're able to do things with, and the things that they're able to do that we have no ability to do as humans ourselves,
Well, yeah. I would urge you to watch Terminator 2 Judgment Day, to watch the sequel, just because obviously that's very much of its time as well, which I think was 1990 it was released. Yes, it was 1990.
Right.
But just to see how the story develops, obviously it's got a hugely bigger budget, etc. Yes. And just to see how all these characters developed. Yeah. Anyway, so that was Terminator. What are we going to be talking about next week?
Well, next week, I don't know if this is another good idea, but next week I'm going to be looking at a film called Love Actually, a British romantic comedy from the mind of, what's his name, who did 4 Weddings and a Funeral?
Richard Curtis. You'll be very pleased to know that after the Pretty Woman debacle, that I don't have any feelings about this film.
Have you seen it?
I've seen bits of it.
I've only seen the clips that were in Sugar Babes and Girls Aloud videos that accompanying it, so I'm quietly confident I'm going to absolutely hate it.
On that note, please don't forget to follow us at Podcast Gaze on X and Instagram. But until next week, Lee, hasta la vista, baby.
I'll be back.